how would I have felt if I had been cast and started to play this character while Agatha Christie was still alive? I think I would have been absolutely scared stiff, because she was very famous for not liking very much actors' portrayals of her characters. And I would have really felt a little bit on the spot, I think. Although I remember when I started filming, being sad that she wasn't there to maybe ask her questions. Whether she would have answered my questions, I don't know. But my stable as an actor, the stable from which I come, is the classical theatre. So I've worked a lot of my life with playwrights who are no longer with us, or writers that are no longer with us. Whenever I get a playwright who's living, it's a real privilege to be able to ring them up or to meet them for a coffee and to ask them what they meant. But in the case of Poirot, my creator, Agatha Christie, had passed away. So I was with another writer or creator of a character that I couldn't spend time with. I think Agatha herself was very clear about what she wanted Poirot to be like. I mean, she had great fun with him, but she hardly ever changed the character, never really developed him. The big changes were from the short stories, or the case books, the ones that we did in the first series, you know, the first 10, 20, 30 short stories. They're written in a very different genre to her full-length novels, which are deeper and take Poirot into different sort of situations and allowed her, and indeed myself, to flesh him out a little bit more. But I think that with all the notes that I wrote, and as you have already heard me and seen me explain, my whole raison d'etre in being Poirot was to serve her and her creation, to be the Poirot that Agatha Christie wrote. And that's why I think ultimately the television programs called it Agatha Christie's Poirot. Well, Poirot himself says, as un bon catholique, that he was put on the earth to, while he was around, to clear it of the crimes. And so I think what I've learned from the audience and the readership of Agatha's books and the viewers of the television series is that they feel very safe when he's around, because they know that with him, everything's going to be okay. He's also very personable towards people. He can also be quite objectionable towards people as well. And he can be very irritable with people and very angry, as well as being very irritating to others. But he's got a good heart. He has a big heart. And he wants justice and fairness and rightness in the world. So when he's around, everything is well with the world. And I think that is endearing. I think that is something the audience, the readership, as well as the viewers, like about him. There are big, weighty issues. You're absolutely right. And there are occasions when Poirot allows people, quite against his faith, to take their own life. There are occasions like Murder on the Orient Express, for example, where he lets all those murderers go free. Well, if you understand him as a person and you reread that book and you forget earlier interpretations of that book in terms of film, you will see that Agatha Christie gives him a huge dilemma as a moral compass. which as you've heard me say, my son-in-law likes Poirot because he looks upon him as a moral compass. But when faced with that very difficult decision about what to do in that particular story, yes, he has to put himself in the place of others and not just from his own sense of justice and what he should be doing. So yes, there's a great empathy towards other people as well. You're right. It's a good question. How did I relate to those three other characters? The wonderful Hugh Fraser as Captain Hastings, Philip Jackson as Inspector Japp, and the lovely Pauline Moran as Miss Lemon. Well, they were very useful devices for Agatha Christie as well to enable Hercule Poirot to have his own world. For example, it's very clear that she wrote Hastings to be the average man in the street with the average man in the street's view. So that allowed Poirot, when hearing the opinions of Captain Hastings, to almost immediately dismiss them, because he would be dealing on a completely different level. He would be coming in laterally with his thoughts, whereas Hastings would be coming straight down the line, logically. And Poirot knows that criminals do not work with a logical mind, and they do not have logical answers to whatever their crimes would be in order to solve them. It's not going to be anything logical. And that's why when Poirot solves a case, it's not necessarily who does it or who is guilty, but I've always said it's as much as a how done it, because how he works that out is because, apart from being the greatest detective in the world, he says humbly, he comes from left field. So Hastings has to, and this is what Hugh Fraser did brilliantly, has to portray that character without making him seem idiotic. And the way he did that was to be the normal man in the street, albeit in the period and as an ex-military. Japp is something else. Japp represents Scotland Yard. And there was a very difficult character to play, actually, and Philip avoided the trap of playing Mr. Plod, the policeman, because that's not what Agatha was trying to do. Once again, what she was trying to do is get logical police work that we all know happens from the Bobby in the street onwards, dealing with a mind like Poirot, who can actually, once again, receive what he gets from the police department and then use that to go off on his own. And then we have Miss Lemon. Well, Miss Lemon, in one of the stories, she has the most perfect filing system. And I forget which story it is now, but she opens her boxes. And I always looked on Miss Lemon as a visible representative of a part of Poirot's brain, that she will open little drawers and inside will be little compartmentalized ideas and information. And that's how Poirot thinks. He opens little drawers in his mind. Some of them are very hidden that you would never believe he would go into. And what he finds there is extraordinary. And so Miss Lemon is always compartmentalizing, getting things wrong, because it's very difficult to be employed by Poirot, because Poirot is a perfectionist, and he will, as such, the worst thing about being a perfectionist is that you demand perfection from everybody else. And she does try. What he doesn't see in her, though, is something that is very, very carefully suggested in Agatha Christie, but never pressed upon, is that she has a bit of a thing for Poirot. He wouldn't see that because he doesn't view the world or the opposite sex in those terms at all. He really likes women and girls, and He loves the opposite sex and wished he had married. But he knows it's an impossibility. He knows that no one could live with him. It would be impossible to reach his standards and his values, let alone get his moustache messed up. Well, his romance was never physical. And when we talk about Poirot's romance, we must remember that it's not a love like us earthly men and women have for each other. It's not the same. Poirot was knocked off his feet by Countess Rossakoff. And I think Agatha Christie had great fun in Poirot losing his heart to a woman that you would least expect him to lose his heart to, which is this big, huge this Russian countess who literally breezes in and knocks him off his feet. But she is also a criminal. And he actually let her go once. And I think he admired her mind, her criminal mind, as much as anything else. I have to say that when we first started the TV series, Brian Eastman, the producer at that time, was very keen that we didn't have what we call guest stars, because those guest stars in these so-called police detective programs, as soon as the audience saw a guest star, you knew that possibly that they would be the murderer, because maybe that's the second best part, and if not the best part, and that's why they've said yes. So he was very keen that the audience didn't immediately identify with that. So therefore, we had a lot of young and middle-aged actors who were brilliant in the profession, and some who had really just beginning. And I'm not going to mention any names because there'll be too many that I forget and they'll be upset. So I would like to say, though, that those coming in who were unknown then have proved to become huge in their own right. And I know in the later years we had more of the guest star because they were desperate to be in them, and Poirot was already the star of the program, so there was no danger in that, and people were getting used to that genre. But we had many people, and the other thing I'd like you to know is that as an actor, watching these young actors come in, I would say to the producer, watch this one. Watch this one's future, because I think they're going to really be big. And if I maybe allow myself to boast, I was never wrong. And looking back now, over 25 years, a quarter of a century, I can say that so many of great actors from different countries, some of them anyway, began their career with me. It was always 1936 or thereabouts. That was a conscious decision made by the channels that we were on, ITV at the time, and the producer, because certainly all the short stories that we began with, Poirot's Casebook, were written in that period. Now, the more that we were asked to do the program, different books were written at different times in Agatha Christie's life, but she never actually changed Poirot. So visually, unless you do just one every now and again, to do a series of him coming in and out of different periods, the decision was taken that that would be too confusing. But as far as Poirot is concerned and his dress, she never changed that, ever. Through all those years, even though she was writing at a different time, Poirot still wore the wing collar, still wore his spats, still wore striped trousers, although the width of the stripe changed. In one story, he actually wore a wristwatch, and then she changed it. He couldn't cope with the wristwatch. He had to go back to his pear-shaped pocket watch. He didn't change. He always wore his waistcoats, or his vests, as you would say in America, and he always wore his morning suit to go to the bank. He never changed. He was always a little man out of his time. Well, Poirot never had anything to distract his mind. He never had a wife, and therefore he never had family. We don't know of his hobbies, except building decks of cards, you know, card castles, to help him focus his mind. His whole life was spent in developing his mind to be, in his own humble mind, in his own humble appraisal of himself, the very best in the world. I think when Agatha Christie was writing Poirot, I think she had great fun with his eccentricity. Today, with a psychological perspective, we would obviously say he was an obsessive compulsive. There wasn't that description in those days. I would say that if you went to breakfast with somebody today and they were given 2 boiled eggs and they sent them back because they were different sizes, you would go home and say to your friends, I was with somebody really odd today. So I think today's judgmental values on Poirot would be an obsessive compulsive. And then you have to look at his own self-appraisal. First of all, an eccentric doesn't know that they're eccentric. In his view, 2 boiled eggs coming that are different sizes are impossible to live with, because where he and I are very similar in this is that what I look upon, I am affected by. Poirot is also affected by his sight, vision. If he sees chaos, he feels chaos. Now, that's a very good way of explaining why everything has to be done in order and have a certain method to it. He says, order and method are my gods. So everything has to be perfect. Everything has to be laid out neatly. Nothing to take his mind away from that neatness and order and put. Now, okay, if we do that modern psychology, you would say, oh, gosh, I couldn't live with this person. That's why probably nobody ever did. But that's him. He wouldn't see himself as an eccentric. He would see himself as perfectly normal, and anybody who's not like that, completely abnormal. And there lies the difference between somebody you may say needs psychological help, or they may be what you would consider a genius. The line is very fine. And, well, I don't think there's any doubt that Poirot was a genius.